Hello and welcome to part 2 of module 7 in our Django series. Today we're going to deal with the enrollment part of our application. There are some business rules we're going to work with. One is that for a student born between October and December of any year, he or she will be enrolled in an earlier year. And the second one is for a student born in 2020 or later, they will be deemed too young for school. The code we need to write is for the form, the view, and the template. So let's now go to our command prompt. Change directory to a virtual environment. Activate the environment. Start VS Code. We'll start by creating the form. For that, in your app folder, new file, and that's going to be forms.py. The first statement will import the forms module. So from Django, import forms, and we need the model as well. So from app name dot models import student. Now we'll create our class. That's going to be class student form inheriting from forms.form. Right? So that's the Django form class. And now we put in our fields. First one, student ID. We're going to use a char field form field class. So forms.char field. As you know, the char field renders as input type equal to text. We're going to use the label argument so as to give this field a human readable name. So label equal to. And we'll use initial as well. Okay, so we see how that works. And the rest of the form fields. That's all for the forms.py file. The next, we'll write the view. So come to views.py. The view name is going to be enrolled student. And that's going to take the HTTP request object. Now in the first statement, I'm going to put in a print request.method so that you can see the type of method on screen coming through this request. Now we will check if the method coming through the request is a post method. Then we initialize a variable form, creating an instance of student form and populating the form with the data coming through the request.post method. Now you can see we have a squiggly there. We need to import student form. So from dot forms import student form. Once this variable is created with the form data, we will check if the form data is valid. So if form dot is valid, then we will access the clean data attribute of the form and store the student ID in the variable stid. So stid equal to form.cleaned data. Now we've got to check if the student ID exists in the database or not. If it does not, we can proceed. Otherwise, it means an error, right? We can't have two students with the same ID. So if not student.objects.filter student ID equal to st_id dot exists. So what we're saying is if the student ID does not exist, then access the form's clean data attribute for the rest of the fields. So st_name variable will now contain form.cleaned data of the form field st_name. Similarly, st_dob, the variable, will now contain the form's cleaned data, and that will be the form field st_dob. st underscore tel will now contain the form's cleaned data for the form field st underscore tel. And lastly, email. Now we've got to determine the age of the student. So to get the current year, we can use a variable equal to date time dot now dot year. To show you the output of this, as well as to study is valid a little more, as well as clean data, let's now go to the Python shell. Change directory to your container folder, pymanage.py shell to access the Python shell. We'll import datetime and we'll also import the model student. We'll store in S1 one of the student objects. So student.objects.get student ID equal to S001. We'll store in the variable yob the student's year of birth. Yob now contains the year of birth. And then current year, to store the current year as per the current date. And then of course we can subtract the two and get the age. Now let's look at is valid. So for that we've got to import the form, and now we can use a variable. Let's say j equal to student form, which will initialize j with an instance of student form. Let's now check the isBound attribute first of j to see if this instance of student form is bound to any data. That's false because there's been no user input. Let's provide some data. Initialize j again, passing in data, check the isBound attribute, and that's true. So you see how that works. Talking about the isValid method. Let's check that as well. So the data is valid. Now we can access the clean data. So if we say, for example, j.cleaned data, it returns the entire dictionary. But if we change the data now to hold something invalid, let's say an invalid email ID, I'm going to just change that name to data1. And let's use another variable, k equal to student form, passing in data1. Now k dot isBound is going to return true. K dot isValid is going to return false, right? Because the email ID is invalid. What about clean data? Returns everything except the email ID. One more point to remember is that I cannot access the clean data attribute of the form until I have run the isValid method on the form. What do I mean? Let's say I have another variable. Let's say data1, which is invalid as we know now. L.isBound is of course going to return a true. L.clean data without running the isValid method is going to say the object has no attribute clean data, right? So first we've got to run the isValid method, and then we can access the clean data. Okay. Now let's go back to our code. We say st underscore age equal to current year minus st underscore dob dot year. Now let's put in the business rule. So if the month is greater than or equal to October, right, and the year is greater than or equal to 2019, then we redirect the user to a URL stating that the prospective student is too young to be admitted. So return HTTP response redirect, and that will be /app name /view name, which we will write shortly. Okay, so how this will work is, let's say the student is born in October 2019. Now, we are saying that if the student is born in October or later, then the student needs to be admitted to an earlier year. But we don't have an earlier year than kindergarten, right? So therefore, we will state that the student is too young to admit. On the other hand, if the student is born in 2018 and in October or November for that matter, then we can reduce one from the age and have the student admitted to an earlier year. So elif st_dob.month is greater than 10, greater than equal to rather, then st_age minus equal to 1. So I hope that's clear. Now we have a squiggly there. We've got to import HTTP response redirect. So up here, put in HTTP response redirect. Now that we put in the business rules, let's assign the grade to the student. So if st_age in, we're using a tuple here, 4, 5, then st_grade sec, and this is just a variable, equal to kg1a. For the sake of simplicity, we're assuming there's only one section per grade. Elif st_age in 6, 7, then st_grade sec equal to 1a. And similarly for the rest of the grades. Now, what if the age of the prospective student is 12 or greater? We need to take care of that. So we just put in an else here and we redirect the user to another URL, which will say that we're still working on incorporating those grades. Once we've established the grade, now we've got to check whether there's room in that grade, right? So we have a variable here equal to grade section dot objects dot get grade sec id equal to st grade sec. Now we have a squiggly there. We've got to import grade section. So here, comma, grade section. Once we have that, we've got to check the current student count. So if appropriate grade sec dot current student count less than appropriate grade sec dot max students permitted, which means we have room in the grade, then appropriate grade sec dot current student count plus equal to 1. We're adding 1 to the number of students admitted to the grade. And then of course we've got to save those changes. So appropriate grade sec dot save. Right, so the changes made to the grade section object are saved. Now we've got to create a new student object as well. So new student equal to student, and here we put in all the fields now. Student ID equal to, we'll use the variables that have the clean data, so that's st_id, and so also for the rest. Now remember that the student model has got 2 foreign keys. We've got to set those as well for this object. So new student dot grade section equal to appropriate grade sec. right? So that sets one foreign key. Now for the teacher, assigned teacher, and again, this is just a variable equal to teacher dot objects dot get teacher name equal to appropriate grade sec dot teacher. Right now, if you go to the admin site and you look at grade section, you will see we have teacher name there in the foreign key, and therefore we use that to access the teacher. Once we have the teacher, then we assign that teacher to the new student. So new student dot teacher ID, that's the name of the foreign key in the student model, equal to assigned teacher. And then of course we need to save that student object. So new student dot save. Right, so I hope that's clear. After saving the student object, we redirect the user to another URL, which essentially will say thanks. So return HTTP response redirect. So that's / app name / view name. If there is no room in the grade, then we redirect the user to a URL that says so. So return HTTP response redirect. That's going to be app name / view name. Now, if you notice, we have another if here, this one. So we've got to take care of the possibility of the student ID already existing in the database, right? So for that, we're going to use Django messages. So what are Django messages? We need to talk about the Django message framework. So the Django messages framework allows temporary storage of messages in a request. And then we can access the messages from that request for display to the user, for example, after processing a form or other type of input. Now, as far as settings go, the settings.py file already has those settings required, so we don't need to make any changes there. Now, Django has some built-in message levels that we can use, so let's take a look at those. We've got debug, info, success, warning, error. Debug is more to do with the development environment, and these messages will be ignored or removed in the production environment. Info, and this is what we are going to use to send information to the user. Success, to indicate that an action has been successful. Warning, to indicate that although a failure has not yet occurred, it may be about to happen. And error, to indicate that a failure has occurred. Now all these are integers, and so we've got 10 assigned to debug, 20 assigned to info, success has got 25 assigned, warning 30, and error 40. Because these are integers, we can use constants to define our own levels, right? So we can have a constant critical equal to 50, and then of course use this message level in our views. Back to our code now. So we say here else messages dot add message, and we're adding to the request messages dot info and the message, right? Now, of course, we've got to import messages. So here we'll just say from Django.contrib import messages. So now we've taken care of that if. We still have two more ifs. What if the form is not valid or the method is not a post method? Then what we do is here we will just initialize a variable form equal to student form. So what will happen is, if, for example, the method coming through the request is a get method, then if you recall the form handling system that we saw in the last session, a check is done to see if it's the first request to the URL. That is after the form page comes in, right? If it's the first request to the URL, what happens? The default form is created. So that is what will happen here. The default form will be created and then sent back to the user for input. Also, if the form contains invalid data, again the form will be sent back to the user to correct the errors. So I hope that's clear. After this, return, render, request, name of the template. And we've got to send in the context, key as form, and the values will come from this variable, right? So form. So that completes the view enroll student. Put in the rest of the views. Thanks, taking HTTP request object, and then return, render, request, and the name of the template. The next view, no room, again return, render, request, and the name of the template. Next, too young, return, render, request, comma, name of the template. And the last one, and then return, render, request, comma, name of the template. Now we need to wire in these views. So come to your app urls.py file, and again make sure there's a comma there and put in the paths. Now let's go ahead and create the templates. So we start with the enroll student template. So in your templates folder, right click, new file, enroll student.html. We start with the extends tag, load static to load the styles, block tag, and we put in the in block as well. In here, we'll put in our form tag now. Action. We need to specify where and how. So that's going to be / app name / view name. Method will be a post method. Within the opening and closing form tags, first we'll have an h2 tag, just a heading there. Now this is a form, remember, we need to provide protection, so put in CSRF token. Now we'll put in a table tag, and we'll say in double braces form dot as underscore table. Here we need an input tag, so input type equal to submit, and the value will be submit. Right, now remember we are using the Django messages framework, so we need to check for that. So we'll use an if tag here. Let me say if messages. So if there are messages coming through, then here use an unordered list. Within that, we'll use a for message in messages. Here we'll have a paragraph tag. ID for this paragraph will be MSG. There's a reason we're using ID, which I'll come to shortly. And then here within double braces, just put in the variable message. When you're using the messages framework, although you may have just one message coming through, you still need to loop through this list of messages. We need an end for now and an end if. That's the end of the enroll student template. The next template is the thanks template. So new file in the template folder, and that's going to be thanks.html. And again, the extends tag, load static to load the styles, and then the block tag and end blocks. We'll just have an h1 tag, class for styling, and just a message, right? So that completes the thanks template. The next template, no room template, so no underscore room.html. From the thanks template, we can just copy this entire thing, because all we're going to change is the styling and the message. So Control C, bring it to no room, change the style class to no room, And the message is going to be, so that completes the no room template. The next one is in the templates folder, new file, and that's going to be 2young.html. We can copy the same thing. So Control V, and here I'm going to change this styling to para, which we already have. And here we say, you can do this as well. Look for char map. And then if you scroll down under this font, select, copy, and paste. Okay, so that will appear in the text as well. So that completes the 2young template. The next one is the work in progress. .html. And then again, we can copy from the thanks template and bring that into work in progress. Change this to para, change the message, right? So that completes the work in progress template. The next step is to make changes in our base.html file. We got to put in the link, anchor tag, class for styling, and the URL, right? And then what will appear on screen? If you recall, in our enroll student.html, we have an ID for our paragraph, and we're going to use that to change the styling for this message so that once the message appears on screen, it stays there for 3 seconds and then disappears. Okay, so come to base.html again, and just after the closing body tag, we will put in a script tag. Within the opening and closing script tags, we have a variable, and we're going to use document.getElementById and then put in that ID. And now we'll use setTimeout, which will call this function after 3000 milliseconds or 3 seconds. And within the function, we specify the style. So message_ele dot style dot display equal to none will ensure that the message disappears after 3 seconds. Now that everything's done, we can go and test our code. So we need to run the server. So let's clear the screen here. Py manage.py run server. Go to the browser, navigate to the home page. Our navigation bar has gone awry. We'll correct that. Let's test the enrollment part of our application. And there's the form. Now you can see when we put in that initial argument, we've got to backspace on that. So we'll see how to make the student ID appear automatically, right? So for now, just put in a student ID that already exists, and we should get our message on screen. And there we have the message. And then it disappears, right? Now, if you enter an ID that does not exist, then we should get the thank you message. There we get the thank you message as well. And then, of course, you can test it out for us entering a month, that is October, for example, and the year 2019. Put in an ID that does not exist. And we get the message, too young for school, right? Now let's go and correct this. So for that, we need to go to style.css. Then you can use edit and find, of course, and then type in enrollment, right? And then press enter again. Change this to 100 pixels And that should sort out that issue. So come back, refresh. Now you see that doesn't change. So then you know what to do. Go to settings and delete browser history. And now go back, refresh the page, and there you have it, right? Before we go and make changes to our code so that the student ID automatically appears, go to your command prompt, and if you scroll up, you will see that we have the first request, or rather the first method coming through the request is a get method, right? So if you think about the form handling system, at this point, the default form is created and the user enters data. When the user enters data, remember in our template, we specified that the method in order to send that data to the URL is a post method, right? So you see how that form handling system is working. Now let's go back to our code. Come to views.py, and in the enroll student view, after the sprint statement, we'll put in student count. So we're counting the number of student objects equal to student.objects.count. If the student count is less than 9, then new ID equal to S00, that literal, plus str of student count plus 1. So if there are 5 objects, then the next student ID should be S006. So that's what will happen here. Else, which means the number of student objects is 9 or more, then new ID equal to S0 plus str of student count plus 1. So for example, if the number of student objects is 9, then the next student ID is S010. The next step is to now send this to the form. How do we do that? At this point, we say form equal to student form. We send in the dictionary. Key will be st_id, and the value will come from new ID. Now that we've done that, if the student ID is being generated, we don't really need this particular line of code. So we can comment that out, control and /. And then of course, we've got to unindent this code. Control and open box bracket. And we don't need these 2 lines, because if you're not checking for the student ID existing, we don't need messages. So again, control /. And that's it. Now, since we're generating the student ID, it would be good if we could make that field read only, so that on screen the user cannot edit that form field. To do that, come to your forms.py file and remove this initial and instead replace it with widget equal to, and that's going to be forms.text input, and the attributes we're going to set in dictionary format. That's going to be read only. The key, the value will be read only. Okay. Now check that the server's running. Control C and run the server again. So now click on enrollment and you see the ID has automatically appeared, right? You see also that the display has changed because we've used widget equal to, right? This ends our session for today. Till the next session, take care. Bye.